Everyone, and Happy New Year. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the January Team Studio TLCC webinar. I'd like to welcome our speakers, Paul Calhoun and Paul Dellanebbia, who will be presenting Java for XPages development. Going to get my PowerPoint started. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that.
Yes, Courtney, we see your slides.
Okay, great. My name is Courtney Carter. I'm the Inbound Marketing Specialist here at Team Studio. On the agenda today, I'll be taking a few moments to tell you about Team Studio, who we are, and what we do. I'll then be passing the controls to Howard Greenberg at TLCC so he can do the same, and then we'll dive right into today's topic. Before we get started, there are a few administrative things that I'd like to cover. We're expecting over 350 attendees today. To protect your privacy, the attendee list is not public. You are all muted during this session, so participation will be through the chat window and Q&A panel. We are doing Q&A at the end of the session, but you're welcome to ask your question at any point in the Q&A panel, and we'll get to it once the formal presentation has concluded. This session is being recorded, and the link will be sent to you in a follow-up email next week. So a little bit about Team Studio. We may have assisted you in the past with application development. We've been delivering innovative developer tools and productivity tools to the Notes and Domino community since 1996, where we specialized in source code control, version management, and source code management. And we moved into the mobile application arena in 2010 with Unplugged. Unplugged gives you the ability to extend your Notes apps out to mobile devices. The unique thing about it is that it leverages the powerful technology of XPages and provides a native app experience for the user. And these apps have the capability to function when offline. You may have heard we recently released Unplugged 3.0. This new version runs apps twice as fast, and development of apps is easier than ever. For more information, click on the banner on the Team Studio homepage. We're very proud to have been the recipient of the IBM Collaboration Solutions Award at the Connect conference last year for Unplugged. This product is available on the major mobile platforms, BlackBerry, Android, and iOS. In addition to Unplugged as a platform, we provide off-the-shelf templates like Team Studio Continuity and OneView Approval. We recently announced an additional template named Customer View. This is a lightweight mobile CRM solution for your field workforce. With this, users have the ability to view, edit, and manage customer information, and also have access to large media files and videos, like collateral to use during sales meetings with prospects and customers. Unplugged works on all the major platforms, and we'd be happy to arrange a demo to show you how these tools work. Just contact me during this webinar. You can also contact us directly from our website or reach out to us by phone. Our next webinar with TLCC will be on February 13th. Howard will tell you more about this webinar in a few minutes during his intro. Our Wireless Wednesdays webinar series picks back up with Part 2 on March 5th. This 4-part free monthly series presented by Matt White will guide developers through Notes and Domino mobile development. Part 2 takes a deep dive into IBM XPages mobile controls. More information on this will be sent in the coming weeks. We'll be at IBM Connect this month. Come see us at booth 114. We'll have plenty to show you and lots of stuff to give away. We're also holding a 1-hour session on Monday evening at 5 p.m. at the Dolphin Hotel Europe 10 room. This is called Mobile Made Easy. We'll preview the new Unplugged 3.0, and Matt White will be showing you Unplugged Mobile Controls version 3.0. And we'll leave plenty of time for you to network and have a drink with us before you head to the showcase reception. Visit our website for more information about this event. And finally, check out the promotion we're currently running on Unplugged to receive 20% off your purchase of 25 or more licenses of Unplugged. Click on the banner on our homepage for more information, or reach out to me directly. And with that, I would like to pass the presentation on to Howard so he can talk a little bit about TLCC. There you go, Howard.
Thank you, Courtney. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, are you seeing my screen, Courtney?
Yep, I can see it. It's there.
Very good. You got my lovely picture. Welcome, everybody. And you'll notice this is a little departure from our usual webinars. Normally, my partner, Paul, is a co-host, but he's been promoted today. He's going to be one of the presenters. So I will be your host for today's webinar. And the next webinar, as Courtney mentioned, is February 13th. And this will be a session that Paul and I are doing at Connect on creating a great XPages user interface. And what we're going to do is preview a lot of the controls in the extension library that you can use to really greatly improve your XPages user interface, the look and feel of your applications. So if you don't make it to our Connect session, please attend the next webinar. The link is there. On that same webpage are recordings to all our previous webinars going back about a year or two. So there's a lot of great content there. If you've missed any of the webinars in the past, check those out. Speaking of Connect, in addition to the session Courtney mentioned that Team Studio is doing, both Paul, myself, and Paul Calhoun are doing some sessions at Connect. I mentioned the one on creating a great XPages user interface. Paul Calhoun is doing a Java for XPages development session on Sunday. That's a jumpstart. Jumpstarts are 2 hours long. And then there's also a session that Paul Calhoun is doing on Wednesday. XPages, still no experience necessary. And then Paul Delanebbia and I are doing a session on Thursday around the application layout control. So if you're still alive by Thursday at, I think it's 10:30 or 11, please stop by then. And please try to find any of the 3 of us or 4 of us at Connect. We'd love to put some faces with the names that we see, the folks who attend the webinars and that we deal with throughout the year. So we definitely would like to see you. Just stop by one of our sessions and come up and say hello afterwards. A little bit about TLCC. I think most of you are familiar with us. We've been doing Notes and Domino self-paced training courses since 1997. We have courses for developers and admins and users too. And since the beginning of XPages, we have done a number of courses on XPages from beginner to advanced. And we also do on-site classes. We also do online private classes if you want a live instructor. And we also do mentoring services. One of the things that a lot of people don't know is we have a couple of great free courses. If you're new to XPages, we have a free 2-hour course, 2 to 3 hour course that is a great introduction. There's no obligation, no charge at all for that. So if you are new to XPages, definitely check that out. A lot of our popular courses are on sale through the end of the month because of Connect. By the way, TLCC won't be having a pedestal, but we're still going to be having a sale, so check that out. And if you want to meet with us beforehand, or I should say at Connect, drop me a note beforehand and we can arrange a time to get together and talk about your training needs. So in honor of today's webinar, we have a new course, Java 2 for XPages development. And this is going to take a deeper dive into a lot of the topics that Paul and Paul are going to cover today. And so that just went on, is made available today, and we got a great price through the end of the month. You can save $300 on that course. Or if you're new to Java and don't really know even the basic Java syntax, we have a Java 1 course that we've had out for a couple months that's basically an introduction to the Java language. It's not so much how to use it in XPages, but it's more a Java language course. And you can get both courses together in a special package. Okay, so I'm going to get started with the webinar. If you have any questions, we're going to take your questions at the end. So please go ahead and post your questions. And the way you do that is in the WebEx interface, at the top, there's a little button ribbon that you can move your mouse to the top of your screen, and then you'll see a Q&A button. And you can go ahead and post your questions in the Q&A panel. At the end of the session today, we'll take your questions and respond to them verbally. So go ahead and queue up your questions as you get them, and we will get to those questions at the end of the webinar. So our presenters today are two people that I've known for many, many years. Obviously, one is my partner, but I've also known Paul Calhoun since I think we worked together on the R4 courseware when IBM first introduced that, and we're the beta team of instructors who dove through that. They're both experts and been involved not only in Notes and Domino development, but have been educators on Notes and Domino for many, many years. So first up will be Paul Calhoun. Transfer control over to you, Paul. Okay, Paul, you should be getting the presenter rights.
All right. Well, officially, good morning and welcome, and thank everyone for attending. So again, as Howard mentioned, my name is Paul Calhoun, and I'm going to go through the first couple of modules here, and then I'm going to hand the reins over to Paul Delanebia, who will pick up, talk to you a little bit about the expression language, and then I'll finish it up talking about some of the Domino objects and stuff. So we're assuming y'all are here today because you are Domino/XPage developers, and you just want to find out what the whole mystery is behind, the Java thing. If you follow the community any at all, you know that there's a lot of talk in the community about doing Java with XPages, and do Java, only Java, don't do Java, only use JavaScript. So we just want to kind of clear up some of those, and then talk to people about what Java is and where it fits in the entire XPages ecosystem or architecture, if you will. So we're going to just jump right in. As far as the language fundamentals go, if you are a Domino developer who is just getting started with XPages and you're not sure, should I learn Java first or should I learn XPages, then it's pretty much our experience, my experience especially, that you want to get your core XPage fundamentals down. You want to develop some XPages applications and have those under your belt so you know how those things work. And then once you really understand the overall XPages architecture, then you can kind of jump in and start learning Java and how to incorporate Java into that particular development paradigm. As Howard mentioned, there's TLCC courses out there that will teach you XPages as well as Java specifically for working inside there. If you want to just learn core Java, there's some other things that are out there, and I like to share this stuff with folks because this is just stuff that helped me when I taught Java. Unfortunately, these were not resources that were around when I was learning Java. But there's a couple of books out there. One of the ones that I can highly recommend is Head First Java. If you've never looked at the Head First series, then again, I can highly recommend that that's one of the things that you take a look at. It's really going to provide you a solid foundation of the Java language. Some other things, once you've learned Java, if you're going to continue your education in the Java realm, you ought to learn XML. And a caveat to learning XML is also probably learning JSON syntax. There's a lot of client-side controls in the XPages architecture, specifically with Dojo and jQuery, that are going to use XML and JSON data sources. And if that's just a tool that's not in your toolbox, then it's probably a good thing to have there. Eventually, and not even a requirement, but something that can sometimes help, is that XPages is built upon a foundation of Java server pages and Java server faces. And the whole XPage architecture really hides that from you. So if you really kind of want to understand more what's going on under the covers, again, you can learn more about servlets, JSPs, and JSFs, and the whole J2E specification. Again, by no means is that a requirement, but the more you understand what's happening in your architecture, again, just the better developer you're going to be. One thing that I address a lot, and this, almost everyone that I've talked to from the Domino development community, that's transitioned into XPages and Java is, I'll ask them, How many times have you, quote unquote, started to learn Java and then it just stalled for whatever reason? You didn't pick it up, you didn't have anything to apply it to. There's lots of roadblocks, and really the last bullet here is the big one. If you want to actually start coding Java in your solutions, then you've got to write some Java code every day. And that's just to reinforce getting into the design environment, understanding how things are compiled, understanding how you're going to interact with them with your XPages, and getting in and working with that. So, if I can impart any wisdom to you at all about learning Java and then having it stick, it's that last bullet right there. You want to really get in and apply something to that, every day. This is just, again, one of my favorite sayings, and it kind of addresses an issue that's out there. That if, the only tool you have is a hammer, then you tend to see every problem as a nail. And I think of, when we were LotusScript developers, when we looked at developing an application, everything was a LotusScript problem because that was the only tool that we had, right? And the great thing about the Domino platform and today with XPages is that we have a lot more tools in our toolbox. So when we were doing client development, we had the formula language in LotusScript and JavaScript. Now we've got XML, Java, XLT, jQuery, Dojo, CSS, all these things, tools in our toolbox that are going to help us actually architect solutions that are engaging and the users want to interact with. So it's really about expanding the tools in your toolbox, and then more importantly, using the right tool for the job. So, a lot of people ask me, okay, well, Paul, once I become an XPages developer, then I'm just going to write all my code in Java. Everything's going to be Java. And my answer to that is absolutely not. Okay, Java will just become another tool in your toolbox, and you're going to start to learn when it's right to use that tool and when it's the best time to actually implement that particular tool. Okay. Another question I get asked a lot is, well, should I even bother learning Java? Is that going to be a good investment of my time? And the TOD index is one of the things that's out there that is kind of a pulse, if you will, of the development that's going on in the languages that are being used. And just recently, okay, you can see in 2014, C went back up on top. But for many, many years, Java was actually the predominant language out there. And it's still running neck and neck with C. So as far as the code that's actually being executed in the inner tubes, this Java programming language is one of them. So absolutely adding Java as a skill set to the tools in your toolbox is definitely going to be something that is beneficial to you. This is more just a reference slide, so a lot of times when you're getting in and working with a particular platform, if you go to Sun's website, you'll see that, okay, well, oh my gosh, there's all kinds of versions of Java. And actually, if you look out there now, you'll see that version 7 is the latest version. Just so you know that when you're writing and compiling code inside the designer, that using 9.0 and 8.5, we're currently using version 6.0. Again, XPages handles all that for you, the Domino designer interface, so you don't really have to worry too much about that. The next thing I want to talk to you about is some Domino designer settings. And again, I get feedback from the community all the time. Domino designer, oh my gosh, it's a horrible, horrible, interface. It's a horrible, horrible design environment. It crashes all the time. I can't do anything with it. And I'm just going to be real honest that I haven't had that particular experience. And one of the reasons I haven't is that every time I install a new instance of Domino designer in a virtual machine or getting something set up, before I start doing anything, then I set some configurations. Probably the most important thing you can do just for the Notes client, but especially the Notes designer, is bumping up the amount of memory that's allocated to the JVM heap for the Domino designer as well as the Notes client. So inside of your Notes framework RCP deploy folder, there's this jvm.properties file. And in that properties file, the first 3 settings are the ones that you're going to want to bump. Now, there's some caveats to this because, again, you want to be real careful when you're setting these property files. There's a happy medium here. If you've got at least 2 gig of RAM, and most people do, then setting that to 512 to 1 gig, that's pretty good. Now, remember, you don't want to set it to the total amount of RAM in your system. I've had people do that, and then they start notes, but then the OS crashes, right? So again, it's not about using all the resources. It's about finding kind of that happy medium. I'll tell you that typically my typical setting is 512, and for the majority of the development that I do, that's plenty. If you do change it to something other than 512, just remember that whatever you change it to needs to be an increment of 4. Right? So that first setting is the actual total amount of heap size that's available. The second one's good too. This addresses an issue where, oh my God, every time I start Domino Designer, it takes forever to load. And that's one of the reasons, because the default starting heap size is like 48. So basically, it has to keep growing that, and you'll see that once you get Domino Designer started, it usually averages right there about 80. So if you bump up that to 128, then you're going to see that Domino Designer is going to load significantly faster. And last is the memory block size. One caveat there, notice that that's a K, not an M. Don't set that to an M. Then that's just going to be the size of the memory blocks that are read and written. So again, the larger block size just allows things to come in and out of memory that much faster. If you do nothing else, for you and your users that are using the Eclipse-based Notes client, this is absolutely one of those things that you should look into. One thing else is, as you're developing, well, then how do I know how much heap that I've used? So if you actually go into Domino Designer, and open up the preferences, you can go down in there to General, and there's a checkbox called Show Heap Status. And then if you look in the lower left-hand corner, it's going to give you the status of what the current heap is, all the way up to the 512 or whatever you set it. So you can kind of monitor that. It's kind of real-time monitoring while you're running XPages locally. So if you're doing the local preview, then you'll be able to get in and you'll be able to see those. One caveat about that is that even though it's a checkbox in preferences, there's a bug that it's not sticky. In other words, you turn it on and then you shut down Designer and the Notes client, you load up the next day, and it doesn't remember it. Okay, so it is one thing you kind of have to remember to turn on every time you start the Designer client. And then you can just kind of monitor that heap status in the lower left-hand corner there. The next thing I like to do is set the XML editor preferences. And the reason for that is we're going to talk about, when working in XPages, the difference between the GUI mode and the source mode. And at the end of the day, your source mode is an XML document. And again, that's one of the reasons at the beginning of the presentation that I recommended that if you don't really know XML, that it's a good idea to shore up those XML skills. Typically what I do is go in and set the line width further out so that it doesn't wrap, and I set multiple attributes each on one line. And basically just those settings, and again, you can set them to your preferences, but basically what that would do is if I had the source format there on the left, that's kind of the before, and that's not, to me, not as easy to read as the after on the right-hand side, where you go and you see, okay, well, each of the attributes is on its own line. It's easier for me to kind of follow that. All right, so, and again, so it's your house, you paint it any color you want it, but that sometimes helps. Lastly is the Java code style. If you're going to be working with this, again, one of the things that is beneficial for me is bumping out where it auto wraps. Okay, so when we're going in and we're formatting our code, I want to bump that out. So in, again, preferences, if you go into the Java code style formatter, there's a default Eclipse built-in profile, and those are not editable. So you simply need to go in and create a new one, call it whatever you want. I call mine Java profile. And then once you do that, then you can go into the settings, and the line wrapping tab there that you see and the maximum line width, what that's going to do is when you do a Control-Shift-F inside your Java source, then it's not going to do all that line wrapping. And again, most of us have monitors, the huge big monitors. I've got a 27-inch, so it just makes my code easier to read, and it has no effect on how the code is compiled and executed. Make sure that's your active profile. That is sticky. It'll remember that. You can go back and you can make any changes you want to that. Okay? So just those two things are hopefully going to go in and really help the whole overall Java development experience. You're going to hear people talk out there that they still do all of their Java development in a separate Eclipse client. And where that's fine, and if you know Eclipse, then that's not a bad thing. Just know that as a Java XPages developer, I probably do at least 90% of my coding in the Domino Designer client. Okay, just so for what it's worth there. The next topic we want to address is Java beans and managed beans, and this is another thing that's been kind of debated out there in the community for a little bit. If you are kind of following the Twitter feeds and the chats and the stuff that's out there, what is the difference between a bean and a managed bean? And basically, at the end of the day, a Java bean is what we refer to in the Java world as a POJO, or a plain old Java object. And that simply means it's an object that you have to manually instantiate and then manually invoke the methods of. It has some rules that goes along with it. Typically, when you are coding that, and again, those are rules you just kind of have to know as a developer. They're not enforced by the design environment. But basically, a POJO is going to be private, variables, field variables, and then public getters and setters. And we'll take a look at an example of some of that. Typically, you want to implement serializable, but if you don't, that doesn't make it less a bean. And in reality, the opportunities for serializing, especially your XPage objects, is pretty minimal. But we'll talk about that too. And again, it's up to the developer to kind of follow those conventions when creating a bean. And so then you get into, well, what is a managed bean? Okay, managed beans really came out of the J2E architecture, and they're managed by virtue of having an architecture that manages them. And so we have a framework called XPages, and that framework is based upon Java Server Pages and Java Server Faces that are running in a J2E context. So again, the XPages development and execution environment that has been implemented really kind of hide you from all that. They quote unquote kind of protect you from that. But the more you know again about how all of that works, then you could take advantage of these things. So a managed bean is simply managed by the architecture. You go in and create a configuration that allows the framework to manage the instantiation and availability of that particular code versus manually instantiating. Okay? Java beans are not managed beans. So I can create plain old Java objects all day long, implement them in my XPage code, no worries. All right? But they can be managed. Okay, so I can have a plain old bean that I can turn into a managed bean simply by going in and going into the framework and defining it. Okay, as managed properties. One of the biggest things that differentiate the two is a managed bean has scope in the framework, and its methods can be called directly without the need to instantiate the object. Each place you're going to use it, which means I can actually, call a method of a managed bean in the before page load event. And then that bean and its methods are available to me. If I say that's in like session scope, then that's available to me through the entire session of that particular application. And that's really the primary factor that separates Java beans and managed beans is that scope. Right, is the ability to go in and say, here's an object that's basically in memory and it lives based upon the scope that I've set it to. Okay. Let's start with a simple Java bean example, and you'll see that, again, there's no great shakes to this. If you're going to implement a Java bean in Domino Designer, then you go create a new Java class. In that class, you're going to give it a package. You import Java IO serializable, and in this case, I have a list. String first name, last name, age, and a list of hobbies. And those are my private variables. So I'm following the rules, if you will, of what a Java bean is. Then I create public getters and setters, and I don't even actually create them. There's a context menu within Domino Designer when you're writing Java code that says, right-click, create public getters and setters. So it's actually just going to write all of that particular code for you. And once you have these, then those are methods that they can then be called by your code. Then inside the XPage context, once we've written that Java code, then the server-side JavaScript code that is implemented to instantiate that bean and call it is to import the package, create a variable of that type, okay, new mybean, and then notice that we just call the getters and setters. Then we're just doing some output, and we're writing the output to a computed field. Okay, so understand that with a plain old Java object, just a regular Java bean, that this is basically the on-click event of a button. Okay, that these methods are not available and can't be called from other objects on the page. Okay, they're limited really to that on-click event. All right, let's take a look. Pop over to, so this demo database is going to be available for y'all, and Howard, I'll show you a link at the end of the webinar. But basically, we just have a launch page here. So I'm going to go into my beans, and then we're going to look at this Java bean. And again, so what you're going to be able to see is here's the server-side Java click-on-click event. And then this is the Java code. And this is a framework we created. It's a framework that we actually use in the TLCC courses. It's really kind of beneficial because you don't have to pop back and forth between designer and the execution to figure out what's going on. Okay. So I'm going to run this demo, and you'll see that we get the output up there. Okay. Going in and looking at that, you'll see that that's our output. And again, notice that we're importing our package, we're setting our variables, and then getting in and executing the methods. So we have all of our set methods, and then we have all of our get methods. Okay? And that's what's going to execute that code. The important thing there to remember really is the fact that it is only available to that particular on-click event. Okay? Well, let's contrast that then, if you will, with a managed bean. And we're going to take that same code, and we're basically going to turn it into a managed bean by registering it. And we register it in the framework. Okay, so inside Domino Designer, I'm going to go into my application configuration, faces config, and then I'm going to double-click on that, which is going to open up this XML interface. And I know that this is like the third time I've mentioned it. If you are not familiar with XML syntax, this is a place that you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. Okay, so therefore you want to at least be familiar with XML syntax, because this is an XML file that you're editing manually. So basically, inside faces config, the XML syntax that we're going to use is providing a managed bean, description, name, class, and scope. So to take that particular managed or regular Java bean and turn it into a managed bean, then we're simply going to give it a description, which is not necessary. I'm going to call it my bean, and that's the name of the bean that we're going to actually get programmatically, right? We're then going to go in and say this is the actual full class name or class path to the bean, and that we're going to call it, and I'm giving it a session scope variable. This means that once this bean is instantiated in memory, then it's going to be available at the session scope level, which means basically it's callable. The methods are settable. The getters and setters are available to any of the events, okay, in that session scope, which means basically on the page. Okay, so this just goes through and provides again, the information that we talked about. The different scopes that are available are the same ones that are available, in XPages: application, session, view, request, or none. Okay, the none is a little new. It instantiates time it's reference, and so therefore it acts more like just a plain old Java object. Okay? And again, that's, as it said, is good if it's referenced by another bean. So this time, instead of instantiating the SSJS code that we're going to use to call the managed bean, notice that I'm not doing any import, and that's because the environment already knows about it. Okay. When I call my bean, which is the name of the bean that I defined in the XML, as soon as I call set first name, okay, then that instantiates the bean if it doesn't already exist in memory. It executes that method, and then again, it's available based upon the scope. All right. So you may look at this and you're going, well, okay, what's the benefit to that? Well, again, the primary benefit is that it's scope and persistence, is that this object now is going to persist. And again, this is kind of a trivial example of this, so we can just demonstrate it. But think about information that you may want to have available, a scoped variable that you want to exist across pages, right? And you want that to be something that maybe is not tied to a particular page. Okay, so you can have a starting page that initiates or instantiates your managed beans, and then those objects are available throughout the application as you go through the different XPages within that application. So again, the thing about managed beans is they always have scope. Setter methods can be executed in one event, getter methods in another. Okay, come across multiple pages in the same application. So the next question I get asked a lot was, well, every bean should be a managed bean, right? I should implement all of my Java code as managed beans. And as a rule, the answer to that is no, 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 no. You don't want to put things in memory just for the sake of having them in memory. You have to ask yourself the question, do these objects, whatever they are, and if it's typically always data, do they need to persist? And if the answer to that is no, then you just need to do one and done. Use plain old Java objects, execute the code, get in and get out. And if persistence is not required, again, you want to just use plain old Java objects. So again, we have a demonstration for you inside. You can go to the managed bean, and you're going to see in the managed bean, again, the code that we already looked at. It's the same Java code. That's one thing to be aware of. If we didn't do anything in the Java code to quote unquote make it a managed bean, the only thing we did was go into the Domino designer, okay? And in Domino designer, we said what we want to do is register this, and we want to make it persistent by making it a managed bean. Once we've done that, then we can go and we can call that bean, and again, the output is exactly the same, but now it's persisted across multiple pages. I could then go into other events of other XPages, and I could call that right out. Okay. That's really the difference between those. So we already done some examples of it, but I want to talk about calling Java code from an XPage. This is another major issue that comes up a lot of times when we're getting in and teaching people Java. And where do we put our Java code? And the latest versions of Domino Designer have actually made it a lot easier as far as where we go and we put in particular code. We'll talk more about when we get into third-party libraries. Okay? So when you're getting into executing Java code from an XPage, the only Java code that we can call from an XPage is Java code elements, and that's the new design element that they introduced with 9. Java source code is source folders in the virtual file system. And that was primarily in 8.5x, where we didn't have the Java code element. So we actually had to go into the virtual file system. We had to go in and create a folder. We had to say it was a source folder. And that's where we put all of our source code. You can call any classes, compile classes in jar files that are located in the jars folder. And again, that's a new design element in 9. Code in jar files that are located in the web content web-inf lib folder, and then compile class and jar files located in the JVM lib extension folder. The difference between all of this is these first 4 options are actually in the NSF. Okay, so the code is actually kind of in the NSF, which is kind of nice in that that code is then portable via replication. The bad part is if you have multiple applications that all use common libraries, then you've got those libraries duplicated across every NSF. And that's why putting it in the JVM lib extension folder may be better. So both in your design environment as well as your production environment, that means any application can call that particular code. Okay, so if you're using 9 or 901, you know about the new Java code element. And you create a new Java class, that's going to open up the Java editor. You provide a package name, and then you can manage them all through the designer interface. And since 9.0 became available, this is definitely my preference and my choice. They're automatically added to the class path. You don't have to worry about that as a designer. It's there. You just put your code in and then you execute it. If you had what we'll call legacy code from 8.5x, then if you still have source folders out there, that still works. And I know there are developers that are still using that as their preference. The only thing that I will communicate to you that is it's best to be consistent. It really is 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So you just simply, as a developer, use the new code element or put your Java source code in a source folder in the Package Explorer. But then be consistent. If you have them both places, it still works. But then it's just confusing for you as well as the people that come along behind you. All right. If you have locally developed or third-party archive files, then you can use the new jar folder, okay, which is a design element, and you can drop it in there. And then any of the compiled classes in that jar file are then again available to your code. Automatically again added to the class path. You don't really have to worry about that. You can also drop jar and compiled class files in the folder in the JVM lib extension folder. And the Java code located in there is automatically added to the class path, basically for every executing application in Designer as well as production. Okay. Once you've deployed your code, then you have the ability to then get into an XPage and call it. And you can basically call a class method by instantiating the class and calling the methods from any server-side JavaScript event. Okay, so if we're using plain old Java objects, then we import the Java package. If you're developing your code, it is the best practice to always use a package. And you'll notice that the package name is typically the reverse DNS name plus some type of identifier. Right? So for me, that's com.nsu.util, right? And then that's where I create all my utility classes and code. You then instantiate an instance of it, and this is standard server-side JavaScript. So I've got a class called stringutils1 that's in the com NNSU util. I call a method called getOutput, and then I write that output to computerfield1. Okay, so this particular design pattern is the one that you'll use every time you want to call a method of a plain old Java object. Right, so this is again kind of one and done. Right, call a method, do something with the result. All right, so we'll take a look at that. So back over in our designer. So first of all, of course, we can't have any kind of Java code demonstration without Hello World. I wrote this code myself. So to just get in and kind of show you how this is working, here's our Java code. And again, there's no great shakes there. We have the get output. We then go in and say input equals hello world, input to uppercase. So you'll see that we're actually doing something with it, right? But then how do we actually invoke that? All right, so we'll pop back to Designer real quick. And if we jump into the hello world XPage, then you'll see on the run demo event for the server-side JavaScript, that's where we have it. Okay? And then if we look over to the left and we expose our Java code elements, then you're going to see, okay, well, there's the Java code that we've created. Right? So if I go down and I find hello world, there it is right there. So in my list of Java objects, I've got hello world. If I open it up, then that's where I'm going to see my Java code. Right? So this is the Java code editor. This is where I come in and I put, actually do all the development. Once it's saved, it's compiled as a class file, added to the class path. I can then go into my XPage, and I can go into a server-side JavaScript event, and I can start calling the methods. So I'm actually just calling the public method to get my output. Okay? Paul Delanebia is going to take over in just a little bit, and he's going to show you an alternate way to do that if you're actually working with managed beans, okay, using the expression language. All right. As a matter of fact, we're going to do that right now. Okay, so I am going to turn the con over to Mr. Delanebia. Paul, you have the con.
Okay. And good day, everyone. And fellow panelists can tell me if I'm projecting both voice and screen. Okay. So just going to go off on a tangent here, talking about the expression language, and then back to Paul Calhoun, and he'll continue talking about accessing Domino objects through Java and using third-party libraries. So why even bother with the expression language? Well, the expression language plays very well with Java, so that's why it's included in this topic. It's a scripting syntax developed in tag languages like Java Server Pages and Java Server Bases, from which the XPages technology was developed. And it's used to invoke the properties and methods of your backend Java classes, specifically Java beans, but can go beyond Java classes and basically return the properties of any object. So we'll see that. In fact, this example here, session scope myvar, is returning the myvar property from the value of the myvar property that's session scoped within the session scope object. There are two forms for the syntax. You can either, both are surrounded in curly braces, and you can start that with either the pound symbol or the dollar symbol for immediate evaluation, the pound symbol for deferred evaluation, which means immediate evaluation, evaluate once on page load. Deferred is also evaluated on page load, but also during other states during the page life. Must be written, some other rules of expression language must be written on a single line, evaluated left to right. You can provide precedence for inner statements using open and close parentheses. You can concatenate several EL expressions to return a single string value, and there's an example there. And this example we'll take a look at. So returning the path for a set of applications and then the actual file name of the specific application. Cannot nest expression language expressions within another EL expression. And this last point here, an EL expression can return an object or value of any type. So certainly you can return the properties from Java beans and manage beans, but from your other objects that are available in your XPages development. There are two notations. The general notation is the bracket notation. So for that, you define your property within square brackets and the property name, or the dot notation. So simply, in this case, viewScope.viewName. That second example for the dot notation would not work. So the dot notation does have a limitation. It must be a valid Java identifier, and since the dash is not part of identifying a Java object, you would use the generalized notation instead. You can combine and chain expressions, and all four of those examples at the bottom do return the same result, basically the path to the current XPage that is running. There are some operators that are available to you, so even though you're writing your expression in a single line, you do have some operators, and you can certainly take advantage of the parentheses to provide precedence. So rated from highest to lowest precedence, you have your mathematical operators, your comparison operators, logical operators, and this one, which I certainly get a lot of use of. So there is a conditional operator, just like when you're coding your JavaScript. So that's the ternary operator, some condition, question mark, and then the action or colon else action. So where can you use the expression language within your XPages application? So the next three slides are going to present three different uses of the expression language. And the first one, anyone who has done any XPages development is familiar with this. You can add a control, like an input control, like the customer input text control. to capture the customer name, you know, an input control to capture the contact name, city, and so on. And then you would bind each one of those controls to one of the fields in your back-end Domino document data source. So by convention, your first Domino document data source is called document 1. You can call it whatever you like. And then you bind it to the field within that Domino document data source. Well, you're using the simple data binding editor, but what you're actually doing when you look at the XSP source is you are coding using the expression language. So the value for that is using the expression language pound. So that is going to be a deferred evaluation. And then document1.customer. Okay, document1.contact. So you're already familiar with using the expression language if you've done any XPages development. The other thing you may have done in your XPages development is use those scoped variables. So very useful, very practical to use a view scoped variable on your XPage or a session scope variable across several XPages, or an application scope variable for you know, all of the XPages within that application. So what you can do using the editor is specify which scope you want and provide a variable name for that scoped variable. If you switch to the expression language editor in the GUI interface, you don't need to use that pound or dollar and open and close curly braces, just the name of the object and the property name. What you're doing in the source editor, in the XSP source, is once again a valid expression language expression for that value property. And more pertinent to what Paul was showing us, you can use the expression language to get and set properties in Java Beans. So in server-side JavaScript, you can also include an expression language expression. And what we see here is this variable, jbean, which is of this class, demobean225, not a very interesting name, but that is a Java class that's been defined within the application. And then simply jbean.property_name to set a property and later on to return different properties. So this is a variation of that. So this is using the expression language with a managed bean. Well, as Paul showed us, managed beans are just Java beans that are managed. They've been registered in the faces config file with a particular scope. So this particular managed bean called app config bean, okay, is registered in the faces config file with the name config, and that is the complete path to that particular bean, app config bean. And it has application scope. So one very good use and application of managed beans is to provide some sort of a application configuration bean, manage that bean, set some of the properties for that, and then it's available throughout your code. So all we're doing here is setting the path to some related NSFs, applications, for a particular application that I'm working on. So you could have the repository of all your design elements within one application pointing to various data sources, the customer's application, the parts application where you're returning the parts, and the sales application where you're creating orders for particular customers and they're selecting parts and quantities and so on. So all of the design elements, all of your XPages, all of your beans would be created within some sort of a central repository, giving you the advantage of sharing all of those libraries and classes, and then use this technique to simply access any one of those applications without actually having to hard code, you know, any of those values. So we're going to see a few demos of that. Okay. In this first demonstration, If I look at the binding for this, I'm using a scoped variable and a session scope variable and binding that to myvar. And that is the same for each one of these controls. They are all bound to the session scoped myvar variable. Okay, so we have an input control and a couple of computed fields, same way. If I take a look at the source, I can see that this first computed field is bound to session scope myvar. I can see the expression language statement for doing that within the XSP source. And the pound symbol indicates deferred evaluation. So that would be recalculated. If I take a look at the other computed field in the source, same expression, but using the dollar symbol for immediate. That's going to be evaluated once on page load. So I'm going to preview this, XPage, and I can see that I have a default value for this input control, and I could set a different number there. I could refresh the table, and for my deferred evaluation, that is recalculated from my immediate evaluation expression. It is not. Okay. Another example. Now, this XPage has a number of computed fields on it with, let's say, some more complex expressions. So we're going to, in this demonstration, take a look at some of the operators that are available to you. Now, I'm using the dump object. This is a extension lib release 9 control where I can dump any object, and I'm actually dumping, for each one of these rows, the actual computed field 1 object and filtering to the value. So I'm actually dumping the expression language expression for each one of these computed fields. So I'm seeing for each one of these computed fields what they're returning, and I'm seeing the expression to return that. So all of these are using the user bean, and the user bean is simply, you can think of it as a managed bean, but it's available to you immediately, built right into Notes Domino 9 or the extension library if you're running 853. Here's that example of using the ternary or conditional operator. So some expression and then question mark. You can delete documents or you cannot delete documents. I'm actually dumping the entire user bean down below here. Now, I'm just previewing this through a browser, so my names for the user bean.canonical name returns anonymous, userbean.common name returns anonymous, and so on. But some other things that are quite useful, like user bean access level, or user bean can create docs. So you might want to use that, user bean can create docs, with the rendered property of a button that's labeled, create a new part or create a new order. So if the user doesn't have that privilege checked off in the application access control list, then you wouldn't want to render that particular button. Okay, another example here. And what we're seeing is a variable jbean that is a new demo bean 225. So I've got a class defined as demo bean 225, and then using the expression language right here in server-side JavaScript to set the first name property, set the last name property, set the my age property, and this is using the bracket notation versus the dot notation above. And then also using that same notation to return those values. So let's demonstrate this particular use of the expression language. And similar to how what Paul showed us earlier, here on this XPage, I'm just dumping all of the code in demo bean 225, and I can run this button or click this button to run this code, or this button, which returns the same result. So basically, instantiating the same variable JBean for the same class, but this time using the actual method names, set first name, set last name, set my age. So that's the distinction between using the expression language dot notation or bracket notation, or actually calling the method names within the class. Okay, just want to jump into my faces config. So here in my Workbench application and in my application navigator, think of my Workbench application as my central repository for all of my Java classes and all of my jars within the application. And this application has a need to work with data in the customers application, parts application, sales application. So in the faces config, I can register the bean that I defined for managing all of my application configuration properties. So app config bean, basically it simply has one property, app, which is a hash map property. And here in my faces config, I'm registering that bean as config, so I can simply reference it as config, and I can reference the app hash map as app, and then use any one of these keys for these various map entries. So if I want to access the customer application, cust app. If I want to reference the path to all of these applications, simply path. So let's see a demonstration of that. So this XPage here, button 2, is the hard-coded approach. So not using my managed bean, simply hard-coding the path and the file name for the various applications that I need to access. This button here, taking advantage of that managed bean. Okay, so the expression language expression is simply config.app.path to return the path, and to return the customer application file name, it would be path plus config.app.custapp. So let me run this one. Okay, and we're actually seeing my app config bean here, okay, with a single property, app. Okay, that's a hash map property. And referencing and not referencing, okay, the hard-coded approach to return those values, or my managed bean approach. Okay, one more demonstration, really an extension of what we just looked at. So here's a live use of your application configuration bean and expression language. So first let me demonstrate this. So this is using a dynamic view panel control, so also part of the extension library and built right into Release 9. Really nice control. So here on the same XPage, I can show any of the views in my customer application or in my sales application. Okay, so any of the views, all on a single XPage, all within a single control. So there's actually not a lot of code behind this XPage. So let's take a look at the design of that XPage. So here in Designer, if I take a look at this link control to choose the different applications, so we've got a number of select items with labels like customer application or sales application or parts application, and once again, using my config managed bean to simply return the file name for that particular application. And then also, here in my dynamic view panel control, and here I can see in my controls panel, we're talking about this dynamic view panel control. So I dropped one of these onto my XPage. I want to make sure I don't drop another one. Oh, I just closed that. Give me a moment. Okay, so here's my dynamic view panel control. And if I take a look at the properties, I can see that the data binding for this dynamic view panel control, sort of like your view panel control, your standard view panel control or core view panel control, you can specify the database and the view. Now these are both computed for your dynamic view panel control. And if I look at the source, I can see that for my dynamic view panel control, once again, not a lot of code here for all of that functionality. But I can see in the data source definition for that dynamic view panel control, the database property is using the expression language, and in this case here, concatenating those string values. So config.app.path concatenated with view scope file name. So when the user is selecting from that link control, the particular application, I'm actually binding that to the view scope variable. And that is all I have to say about that. So Paul, I think I'm ready to hand this back to you. Are you still there?
Righty. All right, thank you very much, sir, for that introduction to the expression language. We're going to finish up here with a couple of topics. First of all, we're going to finish talking about accessing Domino objects, and then a little bit about third-party libraries, and then we want to leave some time for Q&A. So this particular section, accessing Domino objects, I always feel like I'm preaching to the choir. There isn't anybody who knows the Domino object model better than y'all, the target audience. Okay, so if you've used Lotus Script, then you know what the Domino hierarchy is. You get a session, from the session you get a database, from the database a view, from the view a series of documents, from the documents you access the items. The big thing and the big hurdle to get over when incorporating Java code with XPages is going in and understanding, well, how do I get those things? Where do I start, to the hierarchy? So the next session object is at the top of that hierarchy and the starting point for, walking the tree. There are two ways to get the session object in Java code executed in the next page. You can pass it as a parameter, okay? The global session variable, as a parameter to the SSJS code. So we can go in and say, import package, here's the class that I'm calling, and then in the method, I can pass the global session there. So, Paul D, you might want to mute yourself. I think you're typing there. There he goes. All right. So the session object is a global XPage object. And that object, again, is something that you can pass to your backend code. And then it just gets passed by reference. And then once you have that session object, you can implement it. So the Java code there is we import the Lotus Domino session. Okay? We get session as session. And then once we have the session object, then the notes version is, we can call session get notes version. We can call any of the methods of the session object from there. The second way to do that is to get it from the JSF context. And you can basically pull anything out of the underlying architecture. To do that, we're actually going to implement the faces context. We still import the Lotus Domino session. This time, though, that when we call the method, we don't actually have to pass the session object because we're actually going to get that from the current instance. So we say faces current instance, session, equals session. One of the things that we do have to do if this syntax doesn't look too familiar to you, this is something in Java term that we call casting. Because the object we get back from current instance is just a generic object. In other words, it doesn't know what type it is. And Java is a strongly typed language. So there we actually cast this as a session, and we say get application variable resolver context, and then get that global session. Okay. Now, once I've got that session object, then the rest of the Domino class hierarchy can be traversed. Database view, view navigator, document item, document collection, and you will find that syntax is surprisingly identical to any Lotus script you might have written. As a matter of fact, when I am converting existing Java agents and Lotus script agents into Java code, I copy and paste the code directly in, once we've got to the database object. And then I simply edit the syntax because it is the way to do that. All right. So we're going to look at a live demo here. If we go back to our sample code, we have the Domino objects example again. So I'm just giving you working code that you can see how each of these things runs. So in this particular case, we're actually passing in the session object, and then we can call any of the methods of the session object, right? Giving you a working example of how to get that out of the faces context. Now, when we run the demo, obviously the output of all is the same. Okay, but again, two different ways to get that same thing. Is one better than the other? Not really. Depending upon where I need to start, a lot of times I will, just settle upon one. If you only need the database, you could actually just pass the database in as the object that you need, the current database, from the context. So again, you can pass any of those variables in. Now, again, once you've got a handle to it, then we'll run this demo. So I get the session, then I can say, session get current database. And again, this is kind of where I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. The current database method, get file path, get file name, get title, size, full text index. You just simply call those methods just like you do inside your Lotus script. And no one knows that object hierarchy better than y'all, the Notes Domino developers. Okay? So again, once you've figured out how to get a handle to the session, then the rest of that code goes relatively easily. One thing I do want to highlight and point out is document handling, and more importantly, how we get in and work through the processing of documents. Now, this is kind of a long example where I've done something pretty common. I've got the current database. I went out to a view, and I just looped through every document in the view, returning the company name. All right, so I'm going to return to the launch page and then reload that just so we can see the code easier. So in this particular instance, again, I get the session. Anytime you process Domino objects iteratively, and this is one of the biggest mistakes that Lotus script developers coming into the Java world, whether it's Java agents or Java code and XPages, make, and that's processing document collections or any really Domino object iteratively. When we do that, because of the way that the objects are implemented, then we need to make sure that we use a best practice called recycling. And then you'll see this code that I'm using right down here. Basically, in Lotus script, you would have something like, a while loop, and then, doc is equal to get next document and doc. And then you would just simply loop through all the documents that way. If you do that same thing in Java, a lot of times what you'll find is that you'll experience what feels like a memory leak, and that it uses up a lot of memory, and then, then once the code is done running, then it goes away. Now, the issue here is that because Java supports something called object shadowing, then basically every time you would say, get the next document and use the same variable name, it didn't delete or overwrite the existing object. Okay? It just shadowed it. Right, so, and again, this is just the way that they implemented the Java object. So it's not a big deal. You just need to remember to do this. So if I say doc is equal to null, that's not equal to null. I get my first doc. I do something, whatever I'm going to do with the document. I then have a secondary notes document object where I say get next document doc. I then call recycle against the first doc object. And then I assign doc equal to temp doc. Using this design pattern, I never have more than 2 documents in memory at a time. The biggest question that gets asked here is, okay, well, why don't I ever have to recycle temp doc? Okay, because the second I do this, temp doc doesn't have any pointers to it anymore, and it no longer exists in memory. It's available for garbage collection. And if you actually do this through a debugger, you can actually see this really, really well. Right, so going to and just using these base examples, then what I hope to show you and let you know is you've got now the starter code that once you've got a session, you know how to process documents and do recycling. That is a huge amount of the battle won, if you will, for going in and implementing Java, period, but especially Java and XPages. This last section that we want to talk about is using third-party libraries. There's a couple that are out here. one of the things that you have to decide is, I need something that's not available natively. Okay, for example, some things that are not available via the core Java language or the core Domino objects. So you go out into the big bad wide world of the inner tubes and you say, okay, look, I found this third-party library. Now, what do I do with it? Well, you've got basically two options. You put all the jars in the NSF, or you put the jars in the host file system. Putting them in the NSF has some pros because it makes the application more portable. It can be deployed to test servers, production servers. By replication, you don't really have to worry about it. The issue is if you're using that same library in multiple NSFs, they're only available by the code contained in that NSF. And going from version X to version Y has to be done in every application. So if you're only using it in one application, this is no big deal. But if you're using it in 12 applications, maintenance can become an issue. If you put them on the host file system, which is my preference, it's easier to maintain code, upgrade code for all applications. They're harder to deploy, and it's not hard to deploy. You have to get past your evil admins. So if you are your own evil admin, then it's not hard at all. But if you've got admins that are very reluctant to putting, third-party code, on their servers, then a lot of times we just need to prove it in a test environment so that they understand that there's nothing to worry about there. My preference, again, is to deploy the jars on the host file system because I am my own evil admin, okay? And I trust where these things are coming from, okay? If the code that calls the classes from the jars is an agent servlet class code element available in 853 or above, then you put them in the JVM-lib extension folder. If it's SSJS code from an XPage, then you need to put it in the install director XSP folder. They have to be deployed to the designer client as well as the production server. You will not, I can't even tell you how many times someone has called me and said, everything's working perfect in our test environment and our production environment or our design environment, but it's not working in production. And it's because they forgot to deploy the jar files to production. Okay? If the client or server is running when you deploy the jar file, you have to actually bounce the server process. Again, that's one of those steps that you're going to forget. The jars can be added to the NSF container when developing XPages. That's the option I've done in the test database that you're going to get just so that it's easier. If you're using 853 and below, that will contain the XPage code. Expand that folder. You actually have to create lib because it doesn't exist, and then drag and drop them in there. Now I know it's significantly easier. You just click on import jar file, and you copy the jar file in from the system. Now, these things can come from a variety of sources. Open source, purchase from vendors, solution for a particular thing, and they're typically driven by these kinds of statements. I need to parse a string object at every capitalized letter. Well, that's just not available natively. I need to export all my data to a spreadsheet. I need to create a PDF from this data. So one of the go-to solutions for that is the Apache Software Foundation. If you're not familiar with Apache, think of it as the OpenNTF, but for Java developers, okay? This is a consortium of companies and developers, and it's very heavily supported by IBM. IBM actually has employees that are assigned to Apache that's their job, is to help develop, maintain, and distribute this open source software. Some of the things that I use all the time out there, Xerxes Xylan, the XML FOP for creating PDFs, Apache POI for creating Office objects, and then Commons. These the last two there are the ones that we're going to kind of look at. Commons is focused kind of on all aspects of usable Java components. So Commons is not like one Mondo library, but it is made up of individual utility libraries. And so I've included that in the slides here more just for your reference. So if you go down and look, through these, it's kind of a shopping cart of, these are the things that I might want to make easier for myself. Bean utils, collections, compress, DB utils. Those are ones that I use all the time. IO for IO utilities I use a lot. JXPath, Lang, extra functionality for the Java Lang classes. Java.logging, net for network connections, pool, primitives, validator, VSF. Okay? Commons Lang provides a lot of string manipulation, numerical methods, object reflection, and also makes dates a little bit easier. If you go out to the Apache website, you'll see the latest version is 3.3.1, and that's going to work with 8x and 9x. 2.6 is still available if you're using 7x and below. we're going to get the 3.3.1 version. And you'll see that even in that package, you don't have to implement everything. You pull in Lang. That's the highly reusable static utility methods. And we've got lots of examples out there. And again, this is just, I'm going through these really fast, I know, but they're just a list of references. They're a list of methods of the things that are available. Okay, so you can kind of read through those. More importantly, when you get the demo database, you'll see the Commons Lang examples. And I've done examples of a lot of the more common things. So you import org Apache Commons Lang, and we've put that jar file as a jar. We've imported it, okay, as a jar in the jar file. So you can see it right there, Commons Lang. And then we import that asterisk, and then we have available to everything. So string utils is just a static class. That means I don't have to instantiate an instance of it before I start using it. And then you'll see that I then just call different methods and pass those variables. One of the primary benefits of Commons Lang and the string util specifically, the bane of all developers' existence is when we get a null pointer exception. And the great thing about manipulating strings with commons and string utils is that it's null safe. You actually pass a null to the method, you're not going to get a null pointer exception. And that's worth implementing this library all by itself. You did nothing but that. Okay? I've given you some other string util examples out here of doing different things mid. Here's one that I actually had a use for just about a month ago. Is I was getting a CSV file where everything was basically smushed together, but it was proper case. So I could have written 10 or 12 lines of actual just core Java stuff to go and do that, but there is actually split characters by type camel case where I could actually then split that string out. Okay, so it's the little things that just make implementing some of these libraries beneficial. And again, you can look at the date and time and word utilities that are out there and available for that as well. Last but not least, how many slides on that? Let me jump back, is working with Apache Poi. This is something that I do a lot. One of the things that I've been asked to do for years and years and years is I have Domino data, and I need to get that Domino data outside of Domino into a format that non-Domino developers can work with. Typically, that format has been Excel. And again, that's typically not my choice, that's their choice. So one of the things that we come into is that we have 3 use case scenarios. Export all the documents, select the documents, and then based upon a query. So I know that the screenshot on this is a little hard to see, but basically we have server-side JavaScript code where we're actually going to instantiate this poi all docs class. And what this is going to do is take a view and an array of fields and the existing output stream. And what that's going to do is take every document in that view and allow me to write the output of that view contents or actual document contents, okay, to an Excel spreadsheet. So the Domino view I have looks like this with the following columns. If I run that Excel report, because we want to stream it so they can either open it or save it, if they have Excel or the Excel viewer installed, then you'll see, boom, Shazam like magic, I have an Excel spreadsheet of every document in that view. Okay? And now they can take this Excel file and they can do whatever they want to with it. They can do further analytics, again, whatever they happen to need there. Okay? And this is the power of the Poi library, it's actually implementing a solution. Now, you probably know that there are other utilities out there that are going to do this that you could pull in. One of the issues there is, if I didn't mention it, everything from the Apache library is open source, just like OpenNTF. So therefore, you're not actually paying for this library. You're just implementing this library and the time that you're needing to code it. And the other good thing is because you're going to get this sample database, you can actually use these 3 examples as template code that'll allow you to go out and just kind of point to your design objects. This is a use case where I need to go in and I want to select n number of documents, from a view. And then based upon those values that I've selected, I'm going to go and get the selected IDs as an array, and I'm going to process those document IDs instead of, every document in the view. And again, sound like magic, I get just the selected documents. And then last but not least is I need to do this based upon a query. So therefore, I'm going to go in and have a little bit different interface where I choose a form, I choose several fields. I also can put in friendly column labels. I can provide a file name, a sheet name, and then also whatever I want my query to be. So in this particular case, we're getting all of those component values from the XPage, and then we're just passing those down into the create spreadsheet method. Field method, columns labels, page output, the form, the sheet name, and the query string. In the Java code, we're picking those values up, and we're actually creating a full text query, okay, based upon the form name and the query string. And we then do the full text search, which brings back a document collection, and then we process that document collection, in our code. So if we were to execute this, then you'll see that, okay, now we've gotten just the objects that actually meet the full text index query, right? And this works even if the database is not full text indexed, it's just not as efficient, right? So also be aware that your evil admins can actually turn that capability off. So again, just kind of be aware of that. So when I'm asked, okay, well, why do I bother learning Java? This is one of the compelling reasons, is that there are libraries like the POI library out there and available to you to go in and implement these solutions faster because someone's already developed the code that's going to allow you to manipulate things like spreadsheets or PDFs. One of the things that Howard mentioned is, our self-paced courses, and a lot of the demo examples that you've seen here that I and Paul Nebbia did are actually in the courses that we did. One of the things that we really don't have time to show you is creating a PDF from another one of the Apache libraries. Okay? So be aware that if you have not kind of jumped into the Java pool or jumped on the Java bandwagon, that absolutely there's nothing to be afraid of. There's a huge amount of support. One of the David Leedy and Notes in 9 just got finished, 3 new Java articles out there. So between the XPages forum, the courses that are available, David Leedy's Notes in 9, there's absolutely no reason for you to start getting your feet wet with Java development. Okay? So those are some resources and stuff that's out there. Please feel free to go those. Now it's Q&A time, and I am going to turn it back to Howard. Howard, you have the con.
Thank you, Paul. Paul. That was a great session. And so now it's time for questions. We do have a number of questions queued up. Just a reminder that the question and answer pane in WebEx, if you're not seeing it, go to move your mouse to the top of your monitor, and the little ribbon bar will come down, and you should see the Q&A option. If you don't see it, over on the right side, there's a drop-down arrow, and that menu option will be listed there. So while we're taking the questions, I put up the link to the demo database that Paul was demoing from, Paul. So that is something you can go and download on that same page. You can get some more information about our courses. And also there's some upcoming events there as well. So let me, give me a second here, pull up the questions. We do have a number of questions queued up. And actually, Paul, you mentioned our famous friend, David Weedy. He had a couple of questions that we'll start with first. So Paul, David wanted to know, what does the import package do? I never add that in my server-side JavaScript with no problems.
Well, the import package is going to make the classes of that package available. So if you don't use a package name, it's not required. In other words, if you write all of your Java code and it's in what we refer to as the default package, in other words, you didn't use a package name, then you can just simply instantiate the class. The problem with that is going to be if you're going to go in and start using different people's code. So let's say Paul Calhoun created a new widget class, and then Paul Delanebia also created a new widget class. I could use both of those classes in the same Java code environment as long as they were namespaced with the package name. If they were both in the default package, then it would never know which one to use. So not so much with Java agents, but especially as you move into Java and XPages world, you want to put all of your defined classes inside of a package.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Let's go to a question by Patrick. He wants to know, is it possible to use the Java annotations in the Java class file to set the scope of a managed bean? So I guess basically change it on the fly is what he's asking.
And currently that, annotations is an aspect of JSP2 that is not currently supported, in the version that we have in XPages. So therefore, and I talked to some folks in the developer community about it, and probably not going to be something that's available, definitely not in the near term. If they get enough requests for it, or they evolve the architecture to more being JSP 2.0, then we'll see the ability to use annotations. But currently, no, annotations are not supported.
Okay, thanks, Paul. We got a question from Christian. Do managed beans, if they were session scope, could that have an issue on the server due to memory since the session scope lived for a fair amount of time?
No more so than any session scope variables that you have. So, session scope variables, application scope variables, those are objects that you want to kind of be stingy with. You only want to use them if they're actually needed for the entire session. Now, if you have, hundreds of people, thousands of people hitting an application and you're getting, session scope variables for all of them, absolutely, memory can become an issue. So the best practice is to use the smallest scope needed. A lot of times you can get away with using view scope. But then, again, if you want to be able to use that across different events and different pages, then the next level up from that is going to be session scope. So you just want to be judicious. You want to, make sure that, what kind of objects, what are the size of your objects. You don't want everybody loading, your entire customer list into a bean that's available just because. Okay. So if you're really concerned about those, you might look at, instead of using a managed bean object, just use, get the data when you need it, do one and done, and then turn it off.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, I know when I first started with XPages, I would always go to session scope for my scoped variable pool. But then I guess I figured it out. So view scope in XSpeak, the view is the XPage, and now I get a lot of use out of view scope. So if what I am doing is passing values from events that are all part of the same XPage, that is your first scoped map that you want to use is view scope.
Okay, thanks, Paul and Paul. We got a question from Greg. So we have these different places where Java code can be called from. You have the file system. Paul, you presented, I think it was 4 different places. And Greg wants to know if there's a performance difference between those different options.
No, not really. It's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Once the objects are made available to the class path, then it doesn't really matter how they got there. More important than performance for me is maintainability. All right. So, do you keep them in the file system or do you keep them in the NSF? So.
Okay, and now we get a question, kind of a similar question from both Henry Newberry, otherwise known as Noobs, and Patrick. So we recycled the document, but what about the view in the database in your code? That never got recycled.
If you're not instantiating, over multiple iterations of those things, in other words, if you're not instantiating multiple databases, multiple views, multiple documents, multiple items, then it's not really, as important to recycle the parent objects. I actually see developers kind of over-recycling. In the example that I showed you, if we got to the end of the document and we recycled the database and the view, absolutely that would have been fine. You can call recycle against any object, but the reality is those individual objects, once there are no more references to them, they're going to be available for garbage collection anyway because they're not being shadowed by anything. So I typically don't. It certainly doesn't hurt anything if you do. What you've got to be really, really careful about is doing things like recycling session and having users, actually lose their context. So I kind of err on the side of less recycling. I only ever recycle iterative objects. If you're going to recycle other parent-based objects, do so just judiciously. Be careful how far up the stack you go. Again, it doesn't hurt anything, but basically garbage collection will take care of it in a pretty short order.
Okay, and kind of while we're talking about recycling, Christian wants to know if there's any way to avoid calling doc.recycle on every iteration. Could you do something like every 1,000 docs? And I think the answer is really no, right, Paul?
No, because then you've got 1,000 docs in memory, and you can't backport the recycling of them.
So right, no, you can't get a handle to them.
Right. So you've lost the handle to it after you've moved to the next doc. So it's just shattered in memory, and there's no real good way, to get back to that. So yeah, you absolutely in any iteration of a Domino object, whether it's a database, a view, a document, an item. It's best practice as you iterate through them in a while loop or a for loop that you actually recycle the object as you go.
Okay, and we have a question from Ivana. What is better to use, the notes context.get session or the resolve method from Faces context?
It's again 6 or 1/2 a dozen of the other. I would say be consistent. I tend to actually pass the session object in, and that is just the way that I started doing it, and my preferred method. It's not any better than Faces context. For me, and now everybody's going to figure out that I'm lazy. It's less code, so it's less code that I have to actually go put over in my Java object. So I typically pass the session in. The most important thing, though, as I mentioned, is be consistent. Pick one of those methods and then just kind of stick with it.
Okay, and then Derek wants to know, can we access Java Beans through client-side JavaScript?
Huh.
I would think you could call a remote procedure call in the extension library, the remote procedure call, that could return your bean, right, Paul?
Well, you can't call a bean from client-side JavaScript. You can call server-side JavaScript from client-side script. So indirectly, then yes, you could invoke the method of a bean by using the JavaScript colon syntax to go and call the method of the bean. Yeah, that should work. I'm a little reluctant to implement things that way, but technically that's doable, yeah.
Yeah, I think if you wanted it real time to get the result, they do have that RPC call. I don't know if you've looked at that in the extension library. That you can
so
use
either
to
via
call
the RPC call, but you can also just use the CSJS syntax of calling SSJS objects. Yeah.
If it
at the end
change.
of the day, it's just an SSJS object, right?
Right. If it doesn't change, that would be good. Let's see, what else? Kevin wants to know if the demo database will be available. So yes, that is available. Look on the slide that you're viewing right now and get the URL. And we'll put that also in the email we send out in a few days. That will have the URL to the demo database as well as the recorded presentation for today and the slides. Let me see, we're getting kind of running out of time here. Here's a good one from Tim. because a lot of folks are still doing, non-XPages stuff. Is there any reason to not use Java and agents instead of Lotus script, even in non-XPages applications?
Say that again. Is there any reason to not?
Well, yeah. Well, so we're telling everyone to learn Java as suggest learning Java, and so let's say you still got to write your Domino agents. Any reason why you should use Java over Lotus script or Lotus script over Java in your regular Domino agents?
When we're talking about agents specifically, then it really is kind of an apples to apples, because if you look at the underlying architecture, both the Java and the Lotus script call the same C code. So, there is no performance benefit necessarily. Although my experience has been when you are actually accessing large document collections, Java agents tend to perform better once you get up over about 10,000 documents. The other reason is that it provides you a gateway into doing what I mentioned at the beginning, of learning, to learn Java and do it every day. Start transitioning some of your existing Lotus script logic into Java agents, because then when and if and hopefully you make the transition to XPages, then it's extremely easy then to port that Java code into Java objects that are callable from an XPage.
Okay, good. And so, and also, there were a couple questions on performance, and then you mentioned it too, Paul. In our November webinar, which the recording is available, we did had several discussions on server-side JavaScript versus Java, and looping through a number of documents or to test the performance. And so it's definitely something I would suggest everyone look at if you missed that webinar in November, because it was definitely a lot quicker to do that iteration in Java. Okay, I think we're kind of running out of time here. I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and for those of you who are going to be at Connect, we hope to visit with you there, so please say hello when you run into us. So have a great rest of your day, everyone. Courtney, do you have anything to add?
Everyone traveling to Orlando this month, and thank you for attending.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.